In modern economics, inflation is often treated as a feature of complex economies, something that emerges naturally from growth, monetary policy, or global conditions. But this assumption deserves scrutiny, because when you trace inflation to its structural origins, a different picture emerges. Persistent price increases are not a natural law. They result from how we have chosen to organize production, taxation, and land ownership. Today's inflation is driven by two systematic characteristics. First, the tax architecture places significant burdens on productive activity. Income taxes, payroll taxes, sales taxes, and business taxes all add friction and cost at every stage of economic exchange. Goods and services accumulate these tax increments as they move through supply chains, embedding higher final prices into the structure of the economy itself. Second, the financial system channels enormous credit towards land acquisition rather than productive investment. Because land is in fixed supply, expanding credit does not increase the amount of land. It simply increases the price of access to it. This fuels a cycle of rising land values, rising rents, and rising baseline costs around the entire economy. Since land underpins housing, infrastructure, logistics, and energy, increase in land costs propagate outward into nearly every essential sector. Over time, this dynamic conditions society to view steady inflation as inevitable. What is actually an engineered outcome of policy and incentives has been mistaken for a natural economic climate. When examined through a critical lens, persistent inflation is not a spontaneous market phenomenon. It is the predictable result of taxing labor and capital more heavily than land, encouraging speculation acquisition of fixed natural resources, and allowing credit expansion to chase land values instead of productivity. These choices create a feedback loop in which rising land prices accelerate the overall price level, which means inflation becomes structural rather than cyclical, and society mistakes this structure for inevitability. Now consider a radical shift, eliminating taxes on production and exchange, and replacing them with a comprehensive single tax on land value and other forms of unearned economic rent. This transition would not be frictionless. During the transitional period, several dynamics would unfold simultaneously. Goods and services would become less expensive as embedded production taxes disappear from supply chains. Land prices would fall sharply as markets adjust to the new reality that land holding no longer offers speculative gain. Rents would stabilize or decline, since holding land now carries a cost and offers no sheltered appreciation. Speculative credit would contract, reducing leverage and stripping inflammatory pressure out of asset markets. And then there is the political economy. This period will bring turbulence, not because the new order is unsound, but because those who have long profited from the old one will not surrender their privileges quietly. There are individuals who have drawn wealth not from work or enterprise, but from holding the resources hostage. As we unwind the distortions they built, they will use every instrument at their disposal to stir confusion, create doubt, and shake public confidence. Let us be clear, any unrest in this transformation is not the failure of the reform, but the resistance of those who fear losing unearned advantage. As in every great turning point in our history, we must recognize the turbulence for what it is, the last gasp of the old system giving way to a smarter one. Psychological factors such as investor uncertainty, transitional policy gaps, regulatory adjustments may create temporary noise, but they do not generate structural inflation. For the first time in generations, the economy begins distinguishing real economic activity from rent-seeking behavior. Once the transition stabilizes, the economy enters a fundamentally different inflation regime. Structural inflation decreases dramatically when land rent is collected publicly and cannot be capitalized into selling prices. Speculative speculative inflation loses its foundation. Production becomes more efficient and less costly. With taxes no longer inflating input costs, supply expands naturally, moderating price pressures. Public revenue becomes more stable. Land value tax provides a predictable and non-distortive revenue stream, reducing reliance on debt or monetary expansion. Price signals improve without distortions generated by monopoly rents and speculative demand. Prices reflect real scarcity, real productivity, and real consumer preferences. The cumulative result is an economy where inflation is no longer chronic. Prices may still fluctuate with genuine supply and demand conditions, but the consistent upward drift, the kind we experience today, largely disappears. In short, what we call inflation today is not a natural byproduct of modern life. It is a consequence of taxing the wrong things and subsidizing the wrong behaviors. A transition to a system where the taxes are paid by the ones who benefit from land ownership reveals this clearly. Once society stops rewarding passive ownership and land stops penalizing productive work, the structural forces that manufacture inflation weaken and then collapse. Inflation in this framework isn't inevitable. It's a policy by choice and one we can replace.